The gavel echoed through Courtroom 7B with finality. Motion to suppress evidence is denied. Judge Marcus Thompson had barely finished speaking when defense attorney Keisha Washington stepped forward. "Your Honor, I have new evidence that completely exonerates my client." Thompson's face twisted with rage. "You don't know who you're dealing with, counselor," he snarled, nodding to Bailiff Derek Miller. Miller lunged forward without warning. His fist connected with Keisha's mouth with a sickening crack that echoed through the stunned courtroom. The gallery erupted in gasps as Keisha stumbled backward, blood streaming from her split lip. Journalists scrambled for their cameras while the jury sat frozen in horror. "Remove her for contempt of court," Thompson roared, his face contorted with fury. Keisha Washington, clutching her bleeding mouth, slowly stood tall. "Your Honor, you're making a grave mistake." What nobody in that courtroom realized was that this explosive moment of judicial violence would expose a web of bribery, case manipulation, and systemic corruption that had been festering for decades, and transform the entire justice system forever. Because the evidence in Keisha's damaged briefcase would destroy more than just one corrupt judge's career. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers as Keisha dabbed blood from her lip with a tissue. Jury members exchanged horrified glances, while court reporter Sandra Mills typed frantically, documenting every word of the unprecedented assault. Channel 7 news correspondent Michael Johnson discreetly activated his recording device, knowing this moment would make national headlines. "Your Honor," Keisha said, her voice steady despite the throbbing pain, "I demand this assault be entered into the court record." Thompson's eyes flashed dangerously. "Ms. Washington, you are in contempt." Bailiff Miller was maintaining order in my courtroom. The absurdity of the statement sent murmurs rippling through the packed gallery. Defense attorney colleagues James Rodriguez and Patricia Chen sat in the front row, their faces etched with disbelief. They had witnessed judicial bias before, but never outright violence against an officer of the court. If you would have stood with her after that brutal attack, type justice below. Keisha's client, 23-year-old Damon Harris, watched from the defendant's table with wide eyes. He had been wrongfully accused of armed robbery, but now his attorney, the only person fighting for his freedom, had become a victim herself. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Miller stood smugly beside the judge's bench, his knuckles still red from the impact. At 45, the former police officer had been Thompson's enforcer for 8 years, using intimidation and violence to silence anyone who threatened their corrupt partnership. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," Thompson announced, desperate to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. But as spectators began filing out, many approached Keisha with offers of support and witness testimony. Dr. Patricia Adams, a psychiatrist observing the proceedings for an unrelated case, immediately rushed to examine Keisha's injuries. "That's going to require stitches," she whispered, gently probing the split lip. "And possibly dental work." As the courtroom emptied, Keisha remained seated, her mind racing. She had expected resistance to her evidence, but not physical violence. Thompson had revealed his desperation, and that gave her all the confirmation she needed. But what Keisha Washington had in that briefcase would make this assault look like child's play. The courthouse lobby erupted into chaos as word of the assault spread like wildfire. Court officers huddled in urgent conversations while attorneys rushed to witness the unprecedented scene. Security Chief Robert Davis immediately initiated lockdown procedures, sealing all entrances as media vans screeched into the parking lot. This is Michael Johnson reporting live from the Jefferson County Courthouse, where an explosive confrontation has just occurred, the Channel 7 correspondent announced into his camera. Defense attorney Keisha Washington was physically assaulted by a bailiff in open court moments ago. Inside Courtroom 7B, the aftermath was equally dramatic. Jury foreman William Martinez approached court clerk Helen Foster with growing concern. "Ma'am, we need to discuss what we just witnessed. This changes everything about this trial." The other 11 jurors gathered in their deliberation room, their faces etched with shock and confusion. Elementary school teacher Maria Santos spoke first. "I've never seen anything like that. A bailiff attacking a lawyer in front of everyone." Retired construction worker Bobby Thompson shook his head grimly. That judge is dirty. You don't react that violently unless you're hiding something big. The group nodded in agreement, the assault having completely shifted their perspective on the proceedings. Meanwhile, Keisha sat in the courthouse medical office as Dr. Adams cleaned her wounds. The split required 4 stitches, and her right cheek was already swelling from the impact, but her eyes burned with determination rather than defeat. "Ms. Washington," whispered court reporter Sandra Mills as she entered the medical room, "I want you to know that every word was recorded. The official transcript will show exactly what happened." She glanced around nervously before continuing, "And I've seen Judge Thompson do questionable things before. If you need testimony—" Defense attorney James Rodriguez burst through the door with Patricia Chen close behind. "Keisha, are you all right? This is absolutely insane. We're filing formal complaints with the State Bar, the Judicial Commission, and the FBI." "The FBI," Keisha repeated slowly, a knowing smile crossing her damaged face. "That's exactly who needs to see what I have." She carefully opened her briefcase, revealing dozens of documents and a small digital recorder. The atmosphere in the courthouse had completely transformed. What began as a routine motion hearing had become the center of a brewing scandal. Reporters flooded the hallways, while courthouse employees whispered frantically about potential consequences. Judge Thompson paced in his chambers, his hands shaking with rage and fear. He grabbed his secure phone and dialed a familiar number. "We have a problem. Washington isn't backing down, and now everyone's watching." Bailiff Miller stood guard outside, but his usual confidence had evaporated. The attack had been witnessed by too many people, recorded by court systems, and photographed by journalists. There would be no covering this up. Back in the medical office, Keisha's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues across the state. Word had spread through legal networks faster than wildfire. Keisha Washington assaulted in court. Judge allows bailiff to attack attorney. Corruption exposed in Jefferson County. "They made a huge mistake," Keisha said quietly, looking at the evidence spread before her. "They showed their hand too early." "Doctor." Adams finished bandaging her wounds while Rodriguez and Chen examined the documents with growing amazement. "My God, Keisha," Chen whispered. "How long have you been gathering this?" The papers revealed a systematic pattern of case-fixing, bribery, and witness intimidation spanning nearly a decade. 2 years, Keisha replied. "Ever since I noticed the pattern in Thompson's rulings. But I needed something concrete, something that would be undeniable." She pointed to the digital recorder, and yesterday I finally got it. The courthouse security system had captured everything on multiple cameras. Within hours, the footage would be subpoenaed, analyzed, and broadcast nationwide. Judge Thompson's career was about to become a cautionary tale. But as Keisha prepared to return to the courtroom, she knew the real battle was just beginning. The evidence she carried could topple more than just one corrupt judge. It could expose an entire network of judicial misconduct that reached far beyond Jefferson County. The blood on her lip would become evidence of something much bigger than anyone imagined. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Every seat in the gallery was filled, with additional spectators lining the walls. The local bar association had sent representatives, and federal officials quietly observed from the back row. Judge Thompson returned to the bench with visible nervousness, his usual commanding presence replaced by defensive posturing. Bailiff Miller remained stationed nearby, but his eyes darted continuously toward the exits. "Court is now in session," Thompson announced, his voice lacking its earlier authority. "We will continue with the defendant Harris's motion to suppress evidence." But everyone knew the motion had become secondary to the drama unfolding. Keisha rose slowly, her swollen lip and bandaged cheek serving as visible reminders of the earlier assault. The courtroom fell silent as she approached the bench with renewed determination. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "before we proceed with my client's case, I must address the elephant in the room. The physical assault I endured in this courtroom was not random violence. It was an attempt to silence evidence of systematic corruption." Thompson's gavel came down hard. "Ms. Washington, you will limit your comments to the motion at hand." But his interruption only emphasized the gravity of her accusations. With respect, Your Honor, my client's innocence is directly related to the corruption I'm about to expose. Keisha opened her briefcase with deliberate care, the damaged leather showing signs of the earlier struggle. The jury watched with rapt attention as she withdrew a manila folder thick with documents. Prosecutor David Kim, who had remained silent during the assault, now leaned forward with obvious concern. "What I have here," Keisha announced to the packed courtroom, "are financial records, transcribed conversations, and photographic evidence of a conspiracy to manipulate justice in Jefferson County." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Judge Thompson's face went pale. "Ms. Washington, I'm warning you. Submit your evidence through proper channels or face contempt charges." His threat fell flat in the charged atmosphere. "Proper channels?" Keisha's voice rose with righteous indignation. "Your Honor, the proper channels are exactly what this evidence exposes as corrupt." She held up the first document. "This is a bank deposit slip showing a $50,000 payment made to your personal account 3 days before you dismissed charges against Marcus Webb." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically while spectators gasped in shock. Jury members exchanged wide-eyed glances as the implications sank in. "That is enough!" Thompson roared, rising from the bench. "Bailiff Miller, remove Ms. Washington immediately for contempt of court. But Miller hesitated, aware that every eye in the room was watching his response. "Your Honor," interrupted defense attorney Rodriguez from the gallery, "Ms. Washington has the right to present evidence of judicial misconduct. The assault we all witnessed suggests her accusations have merit." A chorus of agreement rose from the legal observers present. The momentum had shifted decisively in Keisha's favor, and Thompson's attempts at control only highlighted his desperation. "This is a conspiracy," Thompson declared, his composure completely shattered. "Ms. Washington is attempting to derail these proceedings with fabricated evidence." But his protests rang hollow in the face of mounting evidence. Keisha held up a second document. "This is a signed affidavit from Court Clerk Helen Foster, detailing how you instructed her to lose evidence in 17 different cases over the past 3 years. Foster, seated at her usual position, nodded solemnly as all eyes turned to her. Her courage in coming forward had provided crucial corroboration for Keisha's investigation. The prosecutor, David Kim, finally spoke up. "Your Honor, given the serious nature of these allegations, perhaps we should postpone proceedings until the State Attorney General can review this evidence." "Absolutely not," Thompson snapped. "This court will not be disrupted by wild accusations and theatrical displays." But his authority was evaporating with each passing moment. Keisha approached closer to the bench, her damaged face showing both pain and determination. "Your Honor, what you're really afraid of is what's on this recording device." She held up a small digital recorder that immediately captured everyone's attention. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Thompson's eyes locked onto the device with visible terror, while Bailiff Miller shifted uncomfortably beside the bench. "3 days ago," Keisha continued, "this recorder captured a conversation between you and Bailiff Miller, discussing how to handle my investigation. Would you like me to play it for the court?" Judge Thompson's face had gone from pale to ashen. His hands trembled as he gripped the gavel, knowing that his next decision could determine not just his career, but his freedom. What she pulled from that damaged briefcase would destroy careers, expose corruption, and change the justice system forever. The digital recorder sat on the evidence table like a ticking bomb, its mere presence transforming the entire courtroom dynamic. Judge Thompson stared at the device with undisguised horror, while Bailiff Miller's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon. "Ms. Washington," Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your course of action. There are consequences for making false accusations against judicial officers." But Keisha had moved beyond intimidation. "Your Honor, these aren't accusations, they're documented facts. And this recording proves that you and Bailiff Miller conspired to obstruct justice in my client's case, and countless others." She pressed the play button with deliberate ceremony. The courtroom held its collective breath as static filled the air, followed by unmistakably clear voices. Thompson's voice. "The Washington woman is getting too close. We need to shut her down permanently." Miller's voice. "I can handle it, Judge. Been doing it for years. She'll back down once she understands the consequences." Thompson's voice. "Whatever it takes, Derek. The whole operation depends on keeping her quiet." The impact was devastating. Gasps echoed through the gallery while jury members sat in stunned silence. Court reporter Sandra Mills typed furiously, documenting the explosive evidence as it unfolded. Prosecutor David Kim rose slowly from his table. "Your Honor, given this recorded evidence, I must respectfully request that you recuse yourself from all pending cases pending a full investigation." "I will do no such thing." Thompson exploded, his judicial mask completely abandoned. "This is clearly fabricated evidence designed to undermine the integrity of this court." But his protests only reinforced the recording's authenticity. Keisha held up additional documents with growing confidence. "The recording spanned 6 months, Your Honor. Would you like me to play the conversation where you discussed splitting bribery payments with Miller? Or perhaps the one where you agreed to fix the Johnson murder case?" The mention of the Johnson case sent shockwaves through the legal community present. The high-profile murder had resulted in a controversial acquittal that many had questioned. Now the fix was exposed. Defense attorney Patricia Chen stood from the gallery. "Your Honor, as officers of this court, we demand immediate suspension of all proceedings until federal authorities can investigate these serious allegations." Her statement triggered a cascade of support from other attorneys present. The legal community was witnessing the complete breakdown of judicial authority, and they refused to remain silent participants. Judge Thompson's desperation reached new heights. "Bailiff Miller, I want everyone except essential personnel cleared from this courtroom immediately. This is disrupting legal proceedings." But Miller stood frozen, aware that every action was being scrutinized and recorded. The assault on Keisha had already guaranteed his arrest. Further violence would only worsen his situation. "Your Honor," interrupted James Rodriguez, "federal law requires that evidence of judicial corruption be reported to the FBI immediately. As officers of the court, we have no choice but to ensure these recordings reach proper authorities." Keisha smiled through her swollen lip. "Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, FBI Special Agent Patricia Davis is already en route. I contacted her office during our recess. The revelation sent tremors through the courtroom. Federal intervention was imminent, transforming a local corruption scandal into a federal case with nationwide implications." Thompson's eyes darted toward the courtroom exits, his judicial composure completely shattered. "This court is adjourned indefinitely," he announced, rising hastily from the bench. Your Honor," Keisha called after him, "running won't change what's on these recordings. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually." As Thompson fled toward his chambers, the courtroom erupted into organized chaos. Attorneys huddled in urgent consultation, while reporters rushed to file breaking news stories. The jury remained in their box, understanding that they were witnessing history. Court clerk Helen Foster approached Keisha with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Washington, I'm so sorry it took this long. I was terrified of what they might do to me and my family." "You did the right thing, Helen," Keisha replied, gently touching the woman's shoulder. "Your testimony will protect other potential victims from this corruption." The courthouse security team, led by Chief Robert Davis, began coordinating with incoming federal agents. The building was effectively under federal investigation, with all evidence secured and personnel questioned. Bailiff Miller finally approached Keisha with his hands raised in surrender. "Ms. Washington, I want to make a deal. I have information about other judges, other cases. This thing goes way deeper than just Thompson." The offer confirmed what Keisha had suspected. The corruption extended far beyond one courthouse. The evidence she had gathered was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. As federal agents flooded the building, Keisha realized that her brutal assault had inadvertently triggered the exposure of a massive judicial corruption network that had operated with impunity for years. The recordings she played next would destroy more than just one corrupt judge's career. FBI Special Agent Patricia Davis arrived with a team of 6 federal investigators, their presence immediately transforming the courthouse from a place of local justice to the center of a major federal corruption probe. The agents moved with practiced efficiency, securing evidence and interviewing witnesses. "Ms. Washington," Agent Davis approached with professional concern, "I need you to know that your safety is now our top priority." Based on preliminary review of your evidence, this investigation extends far beyond Jefferson County. The implications were staggering. What had begun as Keisha's investigation into one corrupt judge had uncovered a multi-state network of judicial misconduct, bribery, and case manipulation spanning nearly a decade. As Keisha provided her formal statement, additional recordings revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Judge Thompson's voice emerged from speaker after speaker, coordinating with other judicial officials across 3 states. Recording number 2, Thompson with Judge Sarah Mitchell, neighboring district. Thompson, the attorneys in your district are getting suspicious about the pattern of acquittals. Mitchell, I've got it handled, Marcus. My bailiff knows how to discourage problematic lawyers. The parallel with Keisha's assault was unmistakable. Violence against attorneys was standard operating procedure in this corrupt network. Recording number 3, Thompson with County Prosecutor William Barnes. Thompson, the defense attorney in the Henderson case needs to disappear, permanently. Barnes, I'll make sure the case gets buried, but it's going to cost extra. Agent Davis paused the playback, her expression grim. Ms. Washington, the disappear permanently reference, we need to investigate whether any attorneys have been harmed or killed in connection with this network. The chilling possibility that corruption had escalated to murder cast a dark shadow over the investigation. What had begun as financial impropriety now carried implications of deadly consequences for those who threatened the conspiracy. In the courthouse lobby, news crews from national networks began arriving as the story exploded across media platforms. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News trucks lined the parking lot, while reporters broadcast live updates about the unfolding scandal. This is Anderson Cooper reporting from Jefferson County, where explosive evidence of judicial corruption has been exposed by defense attorney Keisha Washington, who was brutally assaulted in open court earlier today. The national attention guaranteed that the corruption network could no longer operate in shadows. Judicial officials across multiple states suddenly found themselves under federal scrutiny. Back in the courtroom, Keisha continued revealing the evidence she had methodically gathered over 2 years. Financial records showed payments totaling nearly $2 million, flowing through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Judge Thompson wasn't just taking bribes, she explained to Agent Davis. He was coordinating bribes across multiple jurisdictions. Defense attorneys who got too aggressive found themselves facing trumped-up charges or mysterious accidents. The pattern was clear and devastating. The network had operated with impunity by eliminating threats through intimidation, violence, and potentially murder. Keisha's investigation had exposed their methods while nearly making her another victim. But what Agent Davis discovered next would shock even experienced federal investigators. Dr. Patricia Adams, who had treated Keisha's injuries, provided crucial medical testimony. In my 15 years of emergency medicine, I've seen patterns of violence against specific demographic groups. The injuries inflicted on Ms. Washington were designed to intimidate, not just harm. Her professional analysis confirmed that the assault was calculated intimidation rather than spontaneous violence. The network had perfected techniques for silencing problematic attorneys while maintaining plausible deniability. Jury members, still sequestered in their deliberation room, watched news coverage with growing amazement. Foreman William Martinez spoke for the group. We came here thinking we were judging a simple robbery case. Instead, we've witnessed the exposure of the biggest judicial corruption scandal in state history. Their perspective on the original case had completely transformed. If Judge Thompson was accepting bribes to manipulate verdicts, then defendant Damon Harris had never received fair consideration of his innocence. Agent Davis coordinated with FBI field offices across 3 states as the investigation expanded rapidly. Ms. Washington, your evidence has triggered the largest judicial corruption probe in Bureau history. We're looking at potentially dozens of compromised judges, prosecutors, and court officials. The scope was unprecedented. What began as one attorney's desperate attempt to save her client had exposed systematic corruption affecting thousands of cases and countless innocent defendants. Court clerk Helen Foster provided additional testimony about the network's operations. They had code words, specific procedures for handling problematic cases. I documented everything because I knew someday someone brave enough would expose them. Her courage in secretly gathering evidence had provided crucial corroboration for Keisha's investigation, ensuring that the conspiracy could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. As evening approached, the courthouse remained flooded with federal agents, journalists, and legal observers. The assault that morning had triggered a cascade of revelations that would reshape the entire judicial system. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. The federal investigation intensified as Agent Davis's team uncovered evidence that the corruption network extended into the highest levels of state government. Computer forensics specialists worked through the night, recovering deleted emails and encrypted communications that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Ms. Washington, Agent Davis approached with grim determination. We need to discuss protective custody. The network you've exposed has connections to organized crime, and your safety is in immediate jeopardy. The revelation that judicial corruption had intersected with criminal enterprises elevated the investigation to a matter of national security. What had begun as bribery for favorable verdicts had evolved into money laundering for drug cartels and human trafficking organizations. Comment your country and city. Let's see where people worldwide stand against judicial corruption. Judge Thompson, meanwhile, remained barricaded in his chambers with his attorney, desperately attempting to negotiate plea agreements before the full scope of evidence became public. His legal counsel, Harold Morrison, reviewed the recordings with growing horror. "Marcus, this is catastrophic," Morrison whispered. "The recordings alone guarantee federal conspiracy charges. But if they can prove the organized crime connections, you're looking at life in prison." Thompson's empire of corruption was crumbling in real time. Phone calls from co-conspirators flooded his office as panic spread throughout the network. Judges in neighboring states suddenly found themselves under federal surveillance. In the courthouse medical office, Keisha received treatment for additional injuries discovered during her examination. Dr. Adams documented evidence consistent with previous assaults, suggesting the morning's attack wasn't the first attempt to intimidate her. "Ms. Washington, these older injuries show a pattern of escalating violence," Dr. Adams explained while photographing healed wounds. "Someone has been systematically trying to frighten you into abandoning your investigation." The medical evidence provided crucial corroboration for Keisha's claims about the network's intimidation tactics. Federal agents now had physical proof that attorneys challenging the corrupt system faced genuine threats to their safety. Defense attorney James Rodriguez coordinated with colleagues across the state to identify other potential victims of the corruption network. "We're finding patterns everywhere," he reported to Agent Davis. Defense attorneys who got too aggressive in high-profile cases either backed down suddenly or disappeared from practice entirely. The implication that successful attorneys had been driven from practice, or worse, added another layer of criminality to the conspiracy. The network hadn't just corrupted individual cases, they had systematically eliminated effective defense representation. Prosecutor David Kim found himself in an impossible position as evidence emerged of his office's involvement in the conspiracy. Assistant prosecutors approached him with concerns about cases they had been instructed to handle improperly. "Mr. Kim," Assistant Prosecutor Lisa Chen reported privately, "I have documented instances where I was told to withhold exculpatory evidence, suppress witness testimony, and coordinate with defense attorneys who were secretly working with Judge Thompson." The revelation that the corruption extended into the prosecutor's office meant that both sides of the adversarial system had been compromised, leaving defendants with no legitimate representation. Back in the deliberation room, the jury struggled to process the implications of what they had witnessed. Elementary school teacher Maria Santos voiced what everyone was thinking. If the entire system was corrupt, how many innocent people have been convicted? The question haunted everyone present. The network's systematic manipulation meant that hundreds, possibly thousands of cases had been decided through bribery rather than evidence and law. Court reporter Sandra Mills worked frantically to document every revelation as it unfolded. Her official transcripts would become crucial evidence in the federal prosecution, preserving every word of the unprecedented courtroom drama. "This is the most important documentation of my career," she told Agent Davis. "Every word spoken today will be scrutinized by appellate courts, federal prosecutors, and legal historians." As night fell, the courthouse buzzed with activity as federal agents continued their investigation. Evidence lockers were secured, computer systems were imaged, and key personnel were interviewed under oath. Bailiff Derek Miller, now in federal custody, began cooperating with investigators in exchange for reduced sentencing. His detailed knowledge of the network's operations provided crucial insights into their methods and targets. Judge Thompson didn't just take bribes, Miller revealed during his interview. He coordinated hits on attorneys who couldn't be intimidated. "I know where the bodies are buried, literally." His confession opened the possibility that the corruption scandal would expand into multiple murder investigations, transforming a judicial misconduct case into one of the largest criminal conspiracies in state history. The courthouse had become ground zero for a federal investigation that would ultimately expose corruption in 17 states and result in the largest judicial reform legislation in American history. But the most dramatic revelations were still to come. Agent Davis convened an emergency session in the courthouse's main conference room, where federal prosecutors, FBI analysts, and key witnesses gathered to review the most damaging audio evidence. The recordings Keisha had methodically collected over 2 years contained conversations that would redefine judicial corruption prosecutions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Davis announced to the assembled group, "what you're about to hear represents the most comprehensive documentation of systematic judicial corruption in FBI history." The first recording played was dated 6 months earlier, featuring Judge Thompson coordinating with organized crime figures about case outcomes and money laundering through court-ordered settlements. Recording number 4, Thompson with Vincent Caruso, suspected crime boss. "Thompson, the Rodriguez case needs to disappear completely. No appeals, no media attention." Caruso, "That's going to cost you, Judge. My guys took risks eliminating that witness." Thompson, "Bill it as court security expenses. The taxpayers fund their own corruption." The casual discussion of witness murder and taxpayer-funded crime sent shockwaves through the federal team. This wasn't just judicial misconduct, it was racketeering at the highest levels of government. U.S. Attorney Michelle Harrison, who had flown in from the state capitol, listened with growing amazement. "Agent Davis, this evidence supports RICO charges against the entire network. We're looking at the largest organized crime prosecution in the region's history." The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act would allow federal prosecutors to target the entire conspiracy as a criminal enterprise, carrying penalties of life imprisonment for key participants. Recording number 5, Thompson with State Attorney General candidate Robert Walsh. "Thompson, when you're elected, you'll need to shut down any investigations into judicial misconduct. We've got judges in 17 states who need protection." Walsh, "Consider it done. My first act will be dismantling the corruption task force." The recording revealed that corruption extended to the highest levels of state politics, with judicial positions being used to influence elections and policy decisions. Keisha sat in the conference room with visible satisfaction as her evidence systematically dismantled the network she had risked her life to expose. The assault that morning had been their fatal mistake, drawing national attention to evidence that might have remained buried. Ms. Washington, U.S. Attorney Harrison addressed her directly. "Your investigation has exposed corruption that threatened the foundation of our justice system. This evidence will result in the largest judicial reform legislation since the civil rights era." The praise was gratifying, but Keisha remained focused on her original mission. "Ms. Harrison, my primary concern is still my client, Damon Harris. He's been sitting in jail for 8 months on charges that were manufactured by this corrupt system." Recording number 6, Thompson with prosecutor David Kim. "Thompson, the Harris case needs a conviction. I don't care if the evidence is fabricated. That defense attorney Washington is getting too close to our operation." Kim, "I'll make sure the evidence supports conviction. But if Washington keeps digging..." Thompson, "Leave Washington to me. She'll learn to back down or face consequences." The recording proved that Damon Harris had been targeted specifically to intimidate Keisha, transforming him from a defendant into a victim of systematic corruption. Dr. Patricia Adams, who had remained to provide ongoing medical support, observed the proceedings with professional fascination. Agent Davis, the psychological profile of this corruption network suggests they viewed violence as a standard business practice. Her analysis provided crucial insights into the network's mentality, helping federal prosecutors understand how judicial officials had rationalized murder and assault as routine problem-solving. As evening approached, news coverage intensified, with major networks providing continuous coverage of the unfolding scandal. The courthouse parking lot resembled a media circus, with satellite trucks and reporters from international news organizations. This is Christiane Amanpour reporting for CNN International, where a judicial corruption scandal in small-town America has exposed systematic misconduct affecting thousands of cases across multiple states. The international attention guaranteed that the corruption network could no longer rely on local political protection. Federal oversight would now be permanent and comprehensive. Court clerk Helen Foster continued providing testimony about the network's operations, revealing how they had manipulated court schedules, evidence procedures, and jury selection to guarantee predetermined outcomes. They had it down to a science, she explained to Agent Davis. Every aspect of court operations was designed to support their corruption rather than serve justice. Her detailed knowledge of administrative procedures provided crucial evidence about how the conspiracy had operated on a day-to-day basis. Defense Attorney Rodriguez coordinated with colleagues across multiple states to identify cases that needed immediate review. We're potentially looking at thousands of wrongful convictions that will need to be overturned, he reported. The scope of necessary legal remedies would require unprecedented judicial review and could result in the largest mass exoneration in American history. As federal agents continued processing evidence, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. 17 states, 43 judges, hundreds of attorneys, and thousands of corrupted cases spanning nearly a decade. The courtroom assault that morning had triggered the collapse of the largest judicial corruption network in American history. The courtroom reconvened for what would become the most dramatic session in Jefferson County legal history. Federal agents had cordoned off the building, while national media provided live coverage to millions of viewers worldwide. Judge Thompson returned to the bench under federal escort, his usual authority replaced by visible desperation. "Court is in session," Thompson announced with a trembling voice, knowing that every word would be scrutinized by federal prosecutors and broadcast to the nation. His attempt to maintain judicial decorum appeared absurd given the circumstances. Keisha approached the bench with renewed confidence, her injuries serving as visible evidence of the corruption she had exposed. The assembled crowd included federal officials, journalists, legal observers, and concerned citizens who understood they were witnessing history. "Your Honor," Keisha began, her voice strong despite the morning's trauma, "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, Damon Harris, based on prosecutorial misconduct and judicial corruption that has been documented through federal investigation." The motion was procedurally unnecessary given the federal takeover, but Keisha wanted her client's innocence officially proclaimed in the same courtroom where justice had been perverted. Thompson's response revealed the extent of his desperation. "Ms. Washington, your theatrics and wild accusations will not derail the legitimate proceedings of this court. The charges against Mr. Harris will proceed as scheduled." His refusal to acknowledge the federal investigation, or the evidence of his own corruption, demonstrated a complete disconnect from reality that stunned everyone present. Agent Davis stood from the gallery with federal authority. "Your Honor, this court is now under federal jurisdiction pending completion of our investigation. All pending cases are suspended until judicial integrity can be verified." The formal federal intervention marked the end of Thompson's judicial career and the beginning of his life as a federal defendant facing multiple felony charges. Recording number 7, played live in court. Thompson with hitman Tony the Fish. Marcelli, Thompson. "The Washington attorney needs to be eliminated permanently. Make it look like an accident." Marcelli. That's going to cost extra, Judge. Lawyers attract attention when they die. Thompson, whatever it takes. The entire operation depends on silencing her. The courtroom erupted in gasps and horrified whispers as the recording revealed that Keisha's life had been actively threatened by the corrupt judge. The casual discussion of murder in judicial chambers represented a new low in American legal corruption. Bailiff Derek Miller, now in federal custody but present for the proceedings, visibly paled as his involvement in attempted murder was revealed. His earlier cooperation with federal agents had been motivated by fear of exactly this type of evidence surfacing. Your Honor, Keisha addressed Thompson directly, her voice carrying righteous fury. This recording proves that you ordered my assassination. The assault this morning was just the beginning of your plan to eliminate me permanently. Thompson's face cycled through denial, rage, and terror as the implications sank in. His judicial robes, once symbols of authority and justice, now appeared as costumes worn by a criminal masquerading as a public servant. The jury, still technically seated for the original Harris case, watched in amazement as the proceedings transformed from a routine trial into a live federal corruption hearing. Foreman William Martinez later described it as watching the entire justice system collapse and rebuild itself in real time. U.S. Attorney Michelle Harrison took control of the courtroom with federal authority. Judge Thompson, you are hereby relieved of all judicial duties pending federal criminal charges, including conspiracy, racketeering, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder. The formal announcement triggered chaos in the gallery, as reporters rushed to file breaking news alerts, while spectators absorbed the magnitude of the charges. Thompson's fall from respected judge to federal criminal defendant had occurred in a single day. Defense attorney James Rodriguez stood to address the federal authorities. Ms. Harrison, based on the evidence presented, we move for immediate dismissal of charges against all defendants who appeared before Judge Thompson in the past decade. The systematic corruption invalidates every verdict. The motion carried staggering implications. Hundreds of cases would require review, potentially leading to the largest mass exoneration in American legal history. Innocent defendants who had been railroaded by Thompson's corrupt system would finally receive justice. Court reporter Sandra Mills continued documenting every word with professional dedication, understanding that her transcripts would become historical documents studied by legal scholars and federal prosecutors for decades. This is the most important day in Jefferson County legal history, she whispered to her colleague. We're witnessing the complete exposure of systematic judicial corruption that operated for nearly a decade. Thompson made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. This court does not recognize federal jurisdiction over state judicial proceedings. I demand that all federal agents leave my courtroom immediately. His protest was met with stunned silence before nervous laughter rippled through the gallery. The former judge's complete disconnect from reality was both pathetic and frightening. Agent Davis approached the bench with handcuffs. Marcus Thompson, you're under arrest for federal racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights being read to a sitting judge in his own courtroom created an unprecedented moment that was broadcast live to millions of viewers. Social media exploded with commentary as judicial corruption became the top trending topic worldwide. Keisha's client, Damon Harris, finally spoke from the defendant's table. Ms. Washington, does this mean I'm free? His question encapsulated the human cost of systematic corruption, innocent people whose lives had been destroyed by a perverted justice system. Yes, Damon, Keisha replied, with tears in her swollen eyes. You're free, and you're going to receive justice for what they put you through. The moment of vindication was deeply personal for both attorney and client. As Thompson was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom remained in stunned silence. Spectators struggled to process the magnitude of what they had witnessed, the complete collapse of judicial authority and the triumph of truth over systematic corruption. Dr. Patricia Adams, who had treated Keisha's injuries, observed the proceedings with professional fascination. Agent Davis, this represents the most comprehensive exposure of institutional corruption I've witnessed in my medical career. The psychological impact will require ongoing study. The courthouse had been transformed from a place of corrupted justice into the epicenter of the largest judicial reform movement in American history. Federal agents continued processing evidence, while legal scholars began analyzing the implications for constitutional law. News coverage intensified as international media organizations dispatched correspondents to cover the expanding investigation. The Jefferson County Courthouse had become the symbol of both systematic corruption and the power of individual courage to expose institutional criminality. Prosecutor David Kim, whose office had been implicated in the conspiracy, announced his resignation and full cooperation with federal investigators. "The people of Jefferson County deserve prosecutors who serve justice, not corruption," he stated in his public resignation. The evening concluded with Keisha Washington, bloodied but victorious, standing before the assembled media to address the nation about the day's revelations and the ongoing fight for judicial integrity. FBI Special Agent Patricia Davis coordinated the largest simultaneous raid in the Bureau's regional history, as federal agents moved against corruption network participants across 3 states. The operation, dubbed Clean Bench, targeted 43 judges, 17 prosecutors, and dozens of support staff who had participated in the conspiracy. "This is FBI federal warrant," echoed through courthouse and government buildings from Virginia to Georgia as agents executed search warrants with military precision. The scope and coordination of the operation demonstrated the extensive reach of the corruption network Keisha Washington had exposed. In Jefferson County, the courthouse had been completely secured, as federal agents processed evidence that would ultimately fill 17 filing cabinets with documented corruption. Computer forensics specialists worked around the clock to recover deleted files and encrypted communications that revealed the network's full scope. Judge Sarah Mitchell, Thompson's co-conspirator in the neighboring district, barricaded herself in her chambers as federal agents demanded entry. "I have judicial immunity," she screamed through the locked door, apparently unaware that her recorded conversations had eliminated any legal protection. "Ma'am, federal charges supersede judicial immunity," Agent Robert Chen announced through a bullhorn. "Open the door now or we'll breach it." The standoff lasted 3 hours before Mitchell finally surrendered, sobbing as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Meanwhile, Keisha worked with federal prosecutors to identify priority cases for immediate review. The systematic corruption had affected thousands of defendants, but resources required focusing on the most egregious examples of manufactured evidence and coerced testimony. "Ms. Washington, U.S." Attorney Harrison explained, "We need your expertise to prioritize which cases require immediate intervention. Lives hang in the balance of our decisions." The responsibility was overwhelming. Keisha's investigation had exposed so much corruption that the remedial process would require years to complete. Innocent people remained in prison while the federal review process slowly worked through decades of tainted cases. Damon Harris, finally free after 8 months of wrongful imprisonment, met with federal agents to describe his experience as a target of the corrupt system. "They didn't just fabricate evidence," he explained. "They threatened my family, my girlfriend, anyone who might support me." His testimony provided crucial insights into the network's intimidation tactics and helped federal agents understand how they had maintained control over reluctant participants in their conspiracy. But what federal agents discovered in Judge Thompson's personal safe would shock even experienced corruption investigators. The safe, hidden behind a false panel in Thompson's chambers, contained evidence that the corruption network had expanded beyond case-fixing into human trafficking, drug distribution, and money laundering for international crime syndicates. Bank records showed payments totaling $14 million flowing through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Panama. The judicial corruption had been funding and facilitating organized crime operations across multiple continents. Agent Davis, called computer forensics specialist Lisa Park, "We've recovered encrypted communications showing coordination with cartels in Mexico, Colombia, and Eastern Europe. This isn't just judicial corruption, it's international organized crime." The discovery elevated the investigation to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Department of Justice officials in Washington began coordinating with international partners to trace the global implications of the conspiracy. Defense attorney James Rodriguez worked frantically to notify colleagues across the affected states about the expanding investigation. "We're looking at the largest miscarriage of justice in American history," he explained during emergency bar association meetings. Legal aid organizations mobilized to provide representation for the thousands of defendants whose cases had been tainted by corruption. The scope of necessary legal work would require unprecedented coordination between public defenders, private attorneys, and federal resources. Court clerk Helen Foster continued providing detailed testimony about the network's daily operations. "They had code names for everything," she explained to federal agents. Operation Cleanup meant eliminating problematic attorneys. Silent Judge meant bribing appellate courts. Clean Slate meant murdering witnesses. Her insider knowledge provided federal prosecutors with the operational details necessary to prove conspiracy charges and understand how the network had maintained operational security for nearly a decade. Bailiff Derek Miller, now fully cooperating with federal authorities, revealed the locations of evidence that had been hidden throughout the courthouse. Thompson had backup plans for everything, he explained while leading agents to hidden compartments. He knew someday someone might expose him. The hidden evidence included additional recordings, photographic documentation of meetings with crime figures, and detailed financial records showing how bribery payments had been laundered through court budgets and charitable organizations. Dr. Patricia Adams worked with federal victim specialists to provide medical care for attorneys and defendants who had been intimidated or assaulted by the network. "The psychological trauma extends far beyond physical injuries," she explained. "These people lived in constant fear of a corrupted system." Her medical documentation provided crucial evidence for federal charges, while ensuring that victims received appropriate care for both physical and psychological injuries inflicted by the conspiracy. As night fell on the second day of federal intervention, the full scope of the corruption network became clear. 17 states, 43 judges, hundreds of attorneys, and thousands of corrupted cases represented the largest judicial corruption scandal in American history. International media coverage intensified as the investigation's global implications emerged. The Jefferson County Courthouse had become the symbol of both systematic corruption and the power of individual courage to expose institutional criminality that threatened democratic governance itself. Keisha Washington, still bearing visible injuries from her assault, worked through the night with federal agents to ensure that every piece of evidence was properly documented and that every victim of the corruption network would eventually receive justice. The investigation that had begun with one attorney's desperate attempt to save her client had evolved into a global federal operation targeting international organized crime that had infiltrated the highest levels of American government. Federal District Judge Amanda Richardson arrived from the state capitol to oversee the massive case review process and ensure constitutional rights were protected during the unprecedented judicial intervention. Her presence brought legitimacy and proper procedure to the chaos that had engulfed Jefferson County's legal system. "This court will now address the systematic violation of due process rights that has occurred under the previous administration," Judge Richardson announced to a packed courtroom. "Every defendant who appeared before the corrupt judges will have their cases reviewed for potential dismissal or retrial." The process was monumental. Federal clerks had identified 2,947 criminal cases and 1,203 civil cases that required immediate review for evidence of corruption, manufactured evidence, or coerced testimony. Each case represented lives destroyed by systematic judicial misconduct. Keisha Washington took the witness stand to provide comprehensive testimony about her 2-year investigation into the corruption network. Her detailed knowledge of specific cases and recorded evidence would guide federal prosecutors in their massive cleanup effort. "Ms. Washington, U.S." Attorney Harrison began, "Please describe for the court how you first became aware of systematic corruption in Judge Thompson's courtroom." "It began with patterns," Keisha explained to the rapt courtroom. "Defense attorneys who should have won cases were losing consistently, Evidence that should have been admissible was being excluded. Witnesses were disappearing or changing their testimony between depositions and trial. Her testimony revealed the methodical approach she had taken to documenting corruption, using statistical analysis to identify impossible patterns in judicial rulings that could only be explained by bribery and case-fixing. The first wave of case dismissals began immediately. Damon Harris stood as Judge Richardson formally dismissed all charges against him and expunged his arrest record. Mr. Harris, this court formally apologizes for the miscarriage of justice you have endured, Richardson declared. Similar scenes played out across the affected jurisdictions as federal judges worked to undo years of corrupted verdicts. Prison buses arrived at correctional facilities to transport wrongfully convicted defendants back to courthouses for immediate release. Marcus Thompson, now in federal custody, attempted one final desperate plea bargain through his attorney. Your Honor, my client is prepared to provide testimony against higher-level corruption in exchange for reduced sentencing, defense counsel Harold Morrison announced. The offer was immediately rejected. Mr. Thompson's crimes against justice are so severe that no cooperation can mitigate the damage he has caused. U.S. Attorney Harrison responded, he will face the full consequences of his actions. Federal agents had traced the corruption network's financial operations through multiple countries, revealing that American judicial corruption had been funding international terrorism, human trafficking, and drug cartels. The implications extended far beyond domestic law enforcement. Agent Davis, reported financial crimes specialist David Park, the money trail leads directly to known terrorist organizations in 3 countries. Thompson's network wasn't just corrupting American justice. They were funding attacks on American interests abroad. The discovery transformed the judicial corruption case into a national security investigation involving the CIA, NSA, and international law enforcement partners. What had begun as local bribery had evolved into treason and terrorism funding. Victims of the corruption network began speaking publicly about their experiences. Maria Santos, whose son had been wrongfully convicted of murder 3 years earlier, addressed the media with tears of relief. I knew my son was innocent, but nobody would listen. This corruption destroyed my family. Her story was repeated hundreds of times as families discovered that their loved ones had been victims of systematic judicial misconduct rather than legitimate law enforcement. The emotional toll of the corruption extended far beyond the courthouse walls. Defense attorney Patricia Chen coordinated with legal aid organizations to provide representation for the massive caseload of corruption victims. We're looking at the largest legal remediation effort in American history, she explained to assembled volunteers. Law schools across the nation organized student volunteer programs to assist with case reviews, while retired attorneys returned to practice to help address the overwhelming workload created by decades of systematic corruption. Court clerk Helen Foster received federal protection as her testimony continued to provide crucial evidence about the network's operations. They threatened my grandchildren, she explained to federal agents. I lived in constant fear, but I couldn't let them destroy more innocent lives. Her courage in secretly documenting evidence while under threat had been essential to exposing the full scope of the conspiracy and would ensure comprehensive prosecution of all participants. Dr. Patricia Adams established a victim services program to provide medical and psychological care for those traumatized by the corruption network. The psychological impact of discovering that our justice system was systematically corrupted will require years of therapy for many victims. Her work highlighted the broader social damage caused by judicial corruption, extending far beyond individual cases to undermine public trust in democratic institutions. Bailiff Derek Miller continued cooperating with federal authorities, providing detailed testimony about violent intimidation tactics used against attorneys, defendants, and their families. We didn't just threaten them, he admitted. We followed through. People disappeared who got too close to the truth. His revelations prompted federal agents to begin searching for additional victims and investigating unsolved disappearances that might be connected to the corruption network's enforcement activities. As the day concluded, Keisha Washington stood before the assembled media to address the nation about the ongoing remediation efforts and the importance of judicial integrity in democratic society. Today, justice was restored not just for my client, but for every American who depends on fair courts and honest judges, she declared. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance against corruption at every level of government. The courthouse steps had become a symbol of both corruption exposed and justice restored, with Keisha Washington as the courageous attorney who had risked everything to defend the Constitution itself. The Jefferson County corruption scandal dominated national news cycles, as congressional leaders called for comprehensive judicial reform legislation. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Robert Walsh announced emergency hearings to investigate how systematic corruption had operated undetected for nearly a decade. The American people deserve to know how our judicial system failed so catastrophically, Chairman Walsh declared during a press conference. We will conduct thorough hearings and implement reforms to prevent this type of corruption from ever occurring again. The political implications extended far beyond Jefferson County, as voters questioned whether similar corruption networks might exist in their own jurisdictions. Judicial elections across the nation faced unprecedented scrutiny as candidates struggled to prove their integrity. Keisha Washington received invitations to testify before Congress about her investigation and the need for systematic judicial reform. Her expertise in exposing corruption had made her a national authority on judicial integrity and government accountability. Ms. Washington, Senator Maria Rodriguez explained during their preliminary meeting, your testimony will be crucial to crafting legislation that prevents this type of systematic corruption. We need your expertise to design effective oversight mechanisms. The responsibility was overwhelming. Keisha's investigation had not only exposed corruption, but positioned her as a leading voice in the national reform movement that would reshape American judicial administration. Major law schools began developing curricula based on the Jefferson County case, using Keisha's investigation as a template for teaching legal ethics and corruption detection. Her methodical approach to gathering evidence had created a model for future investigators. This case will be studied for decades, explained Professor Michael Chen at Harvard Law School. Ms. Washington's investigation demonstrates how individual attorneys can protect democratic institutions through courage and methodical investigation. The academic attention ensured that future lawyers would be trained to recognize and expose judicial corruption, creating a permanent defense against systematic misconduct. International attention intensified as law enforcement agencies in 17 countries began investigating their connections to the corruption network's money laundering operations. The global implications had transformed a local scandal into an international organized crime investigation. Interpol coordinated with FBI agents to trace financial networks that had funneled American judicial bribery money into terrorist organizations, drug cartels, and human trafficking operations across multiple continents. Agent Davis, reported Interpol liaison Marie Dubois, we've identified corruption networks in 12 countries that operated similarly to your Jefferson County case. This appears to be a global model for judicial corruption that threatens democratic governance worldwide. The discovery that the corruption model had been exported internationally elevated the investigation to the highest levels of global law enforcement and diplomatic concern. Media coverage expanded as investigative journalists uncovered evidence of similar corruption networks in other American jurisdictions. The Jefferson County case had inspired whistleblowers and investigators across the nation to expose local corruption they had previously kept secret. This is Anderson Cooper with breaking news from Chicago, where federal agents have raided Cook County Courthouse based on evidence similar to the Jefferson County scandal, CNN reported, as the investigation sparked nationwide judicial reviews. The domino effect created by Keisha's courage was exposing corruption networks across the American judicial system, leading to the largest government reform movement since Watergate. Victim advocacy groups mobilized to support the thousands of people whose lives had been destroyed by systematic judicial corruption. The scale of necessary remediation required unprecedented coordination between government agencies and non-profit organizations. We're dealing with generational trauma, explained Victim Services Director Lisa Martinez. Entire families have been destroyed by these corrupt verdicts. The healing process will require years of support and resources. The human cost of judicial corruption extended far beyond individual cases to encompass communities that had lost faith in democratic institutions and legal processes. Defense attorney James Rodriguez coordinated with bar associations nationwide to identify attorneys who had been intimidated, threatened, or eliminated by corruption networks. The systematic targeting of effective defense counsel had compromised constitutional rights across multiple jurisdictions. We're discovering that aggressive defense attorneys in corruption-prone jurisdictions faced systematic intimidation, he reported to federal investigators. Some disappeared entirely from practice, while others modified their approach to avoid retaliation. The revelation that constitutional rights had been systematically undermined through attorney intimidation added another layer of federal civil rights violations to the expanding investigation. Technology companies began developing software systems to detect statistical patterns that might indicate judicial corruption, using algorithms based on Keisha's investigative methods to flag suspicious verdict patterns and case outcomes. Ms. Washington's approach to statistical analysis has revolutionized corruption detection, explained software developer David Kim. We're creating systems that can automatically flag potential corruption for investigation. The technological innovations inspired by the case would provide permanent monitoring capabilities to prevent future systematic corruption. As evening approached, Keisha Washington prepared for her upcoming congressional testimony while continuing to work with federal agents on the massive remediation effort. Her assault that morning had triggered the largest judicial reform movement in American history. Prison buses continued arriving at correctional facilities to transport wrongfully convicted defendants back to courthouses for case reviews and potential immediate release. Each bus represented lives restored and families reunited after years of systematic injustice. The Jefferson County Courthouse had been transformed from a symbol of corruption into a beacon of hope for judicial reform and government accountability. Keisha Washington's courage had proven that individual citizens could still challenge and defeat systematic institutional corruption. News coverage concluded each day with updates on the expanding investigation and the ongoing efforts to restore justice for thousands of victims of the largest judicial corruption scandal in American history. 6 months after the explosive courthouse confrontation, the Jefferson County case had fundamentally transformed American judicial administration and international corruption detection. The Keisha Washington Judicial Integrity Act passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, establishing permanent oversight mechanisms for all federal and state courts. This legislation ensures that what happened in Jefferson County can never happen again, President Sarah Mitchell declared during the White House signing ceremony. Keisha Washington's courage has protected democracy itself through her willingness to expose systematic corruption. The comprehensive reform package included mandatory rotation of bailiffs and court personnel, statistical monitoring of judicial decisions, whistleblower protections for attorneys and court staff, and federal oversight of state judicial systems showing suspicious patterns. Keisha Washington, now serving as the first Director of Judicial Integrity for the Department of Justice, addressed the assembled dignitaries during the bill signing. This legislation honors every victim of judicial corruption and ensures that future attorneys won't face assault for seeking justice. Her new position carried responsibility for implementing nationwide corruption detection systems and investigating suspicious judicial patterns. The role represented a complete transformation from local defense attorney to national guardian of judicial integrity. The final conviction statistics were staggering. 43 judges sentenced to federal prison, 17 prosecutors convicted of conspiracy charges, and 127 support staff found guilty of various corruption-related offenses. The sentences averaged 15 years in federal prison, without possibility of parole. Marcus Thompson received life imprisonment without parole for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and terrorism financing. His empire of corruption had been completely dismantled, with assets forfeited to compensate victims and fund judicial reform initiatives. The defendant's crimes against justice were so severe that only the most serious punishment adequately reflects the damage to our democratic institutions, Federal Judge Amanda Richardson declared during Thompson's sentencing. Bailiff Derek Miller received 25 years for assault on a judicial officer, conspiracy and accessory to murder charges. His cooperation with federal investigators had earned reduced sentencing, but couldn't eliminate the consequences of his violent enforcement of the corruption network. The case review process had resulted in 2,147 criminal case dismissals and 1,203 civil case reversals, representing the largest judicial remediation effort in American history. Innocent people who had spent years in prison were finally free, while corrupt verdicts were officially overturned. Damon Harris, Keisha's original client, had become a symbol of systematic judicial misconduct victims. His wrongful prosecution had been the catalyst that exposed corruption affecting thousands of cases and countless innocent defendants. "Ms. Washington didn't just save my life," he explained during a victim advocacy conference. "She saved thousands of lives by exposing a system that was destroying innocent people to protect corruption." His testimony helped secure passage of victim compensation legislation, providing financial support for those harmed by systematic judicial misconduct. International implications continued expanding as law enforcement agencies in 23 countries dismantled corruption networks modeled on the Jefferson County system. The global investigation had resulted in 312 judicial officials arrested worldwide and recovery of $847 million in corruption proceeds. The Jefferson County case has triggered the largest international judicial reform movement in history, explained Interpol Director General Michel Dubois. Ms. Washington's investigation has protected democratic institutions across multiple continents. The global impact ensured that Keisha's courage had influenced judicial systems far beyond American borders, creating permanent international monitoring systems for corruption detection. Dr. Patricia Adams published definitive research on the psychological impact of systematic judicial corruption, establishing treatment protocols for victims and ensuring that trauma counseling would be available during future corruption investigations. The Jefferson County case revealed that judicial corruption creates unique psychological trauma that requires specialized treatment, she explained during medical conferences. "We've developed protocols that will help future victims recover from institutional betrayal." Her work ensured that the human cost of corruption would be properly addressed in future cases, providing comprehensive support for victims of institutional misconduct. The courthouse steps where Keisha had been assaulted became a permanent memorial to judicial integrity, with a bronze plaque commemorating her courage and the victims of systematic corruption. The inscription read, "In honor of all who risk everything to defend justice against corruption." Legal historians began comprehensive analysis of the case's impact on American jurisprudence, with early assessments suggesting it ranked among the most important judicial events since Brown v. Board of Education in terms of systematic reform and constitutional protection. The Jefferson County case represents a watershed moment in American legal history, explained constitutional law professor Elizabeth Chen. It proved that individual courage combined with methodical investigation can expose and defeat even the most sophisticated institutional corruption. Academic attention ensured that future generations would study the case as a model for protecting democratic institutions through individual action and systematic investigation. 5 years later, Keisha Washington continued serving as Director of Judicial Integrity, while the systems she had inspired successfully detected and prevented corruption networks in 17 states. Her assault had triggered permanent reforms that protected American democracy from systematic institutional misconduct. The blood on her lip that morning had become evidence of something much bigger than anyone imagined, proof that individual courage could still triumph over systematic corruption and that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and shared your locations in solidarity with judicial integrity. Seeing support from New York to London, from Toronto to Sydney, proves that the fight for honest courts transcends national borders. If this story moved you, Please subscribe for more stories of courage in our legal system. Until next time, remember that individual courage can still defeat systematic corruption when we stand together for justice.